Welcome to Takeaway Tuesday live at Symposium, where today we are talking with Dr. Michael Lamb. And Dr. Lamb is an institution in the field that I really believe that your research from the beginning, certainly from my beginning as an interviewer 28 years ago, that your work has informed me, supported me, guided me in what I do. So thank you for being here today, Dr. Lamb. With your work, truly everything that you have done informs the majority, maybe all of the different protocols utilized in the United States. What have you found, or maybe what drew you to this field in the beginning, and what are some changes you've seen over the years?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and to be at Symposium. I was meant to be here, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and then
COVID.
a little thing called a pandemic changed our lives. You know, I came to this topic in a very different way than you did. Mm-hmm. I was not working in the field. I was a researcher. I was studying the factors that affect children's development.
Oh,
and mm-hmm. one of the issues had to do with child abuse. And as I read the research on how child abuse affected children, the one thing that struck me, puzzled me, and later came to appall me, is that nobody was asking the children about their experiences and how those experiences had affected them. And when I asked others about why this was the case, people said, well, kids aren't very reliable sources of information. And I didn't believe that for a second. I was a developmental psychologist. I was a parent. I loved children. And I knew children actually could give us lots of information. Mm-hmm. And by then we had a lot of research conducted that really showed the incredible capacities that children had. And that was part of what motivated me to get into this field. It was an attempt to dispel the myth that children were not reliable sources of information. And then as we dug in, it became clear that it was a complicated issue, that there were circumstances in which children were more or less motivated to talk, that children differed, that there were some things they were more comfortable talking about than others. And that was intriguing to me. And it was the intrigue about trying to see how we could take all the information we had gathered and use it to help unlock the capacities of children. And that's really what motivated us, to try and distill that information, to learn through practice, through working with interviews, just how you could make children into the most competent witnesses they could be.
Mm-hmm. Have you found over the years that I worry sometimes that interviewers, I don't know how to say this, but maybe we miss the mark, that we don't allow children, that sometimes the way we interact works against their competencies, that we don't help demonstrate how competent they can be in an interview.
Sure, I think that is the case, and I think it was more commonly the case when I started working in this area 30-some years ago. It was clear that a lot of what was considered to be good practice was actually off-putting and work to diminish children's capacities rather than raise them. And I think, a lot of what I've focused on over time is trying to understand, first of all, the factors that help children from a sort of cognitive point of view, best retrieve information from memory, best articulate that, understand the rules of the conversation what the person is expecting of you, and also better understand how children were approaching this from a more emotional point of view, and being aware of those emotions, whether they were fear, whether they were anxiety, whether they were embarrassment, whether they guilt, and learn to create a dynamic in a very short amount of time, so that the child really feels, I can trust this person. This person really cares about me, and I can trust this person with intimate information about my experiences and what's happened to me. And I think that's the challenge in any forensic interview, and that's tough. And so I think it's quite commonly the case that people don't do that as well as they might. I think initially we were really so anxious about appearing suggestive that it led some interviewers to be rather stiff and inhumane, and that worked against establishing rapport and creating that degree of trust. On the other hand, we do know it is a problem if you are warm and suggestive, and it's navigating those paths, I think, which is very difficult. And that's why, I think the only way you build skill is by trying, seeing what works well, understanding where you might have done something differently, and being willing to recognize that not every interaction, just as in everyday life, sometimes things don't go as well as they might, but there's certain things you can avoid doing. And you asked earlier, what I think has changed. I think, on average, interviews today are better than they were 35 years ago. There's little doubt in my mind. Certainly, people are much less suggestive in the way they proceed. We've seen many fewer suggestive questions, approaches in interviews now. And most interviewers try to ask open-ended questions. Some ask quite a few. I think most don't ask as many as they should.
True.
But they're trying to do it. And I think the problem is always around the issue of being able to frame a good open follow-up question when the question at the top of your mind is a much narrower question.
Yes.
And so it's quite easy to not fight against it and let it happen. And then you want to have as your habitual response, a follow-up to that, which is an open question so that you can retrieve where you are. It's a process. And I think what's great about the training you provide and the people I see here at the Symposium is that they recognize the value of this continuing process.
Yes.
And the need to constantly revise what they do, how they do it, with humility and recognition that every interview we do is flawed in some way.
Yes.
And just because it's flawed in some way doesn't mean it's worthless. I think that this is a really interesting issue to navigate as well for interviewers.
Certainly, one of the things that we say in an interview training is there's no such thing as a perfect interview. I've never seen one. I certainly have never done one.
Yeah.
But I do think that this is an extremely nuanced job to be an interviewer, to gather information. And certainly when someone goes through maybe their first interview training, we're just really introducing them to the fact that there is forensic interviewing and maybe what one looks like or what is a particular protocol that is used. But it takes lifelong learning, and you have to be willing to, as you said, to look at your own work and to see where maybe you had an error and to be willing to say, maybe I could have asked that in a different way, or could I have done something that would have made it easier for this child while not being suggestive, but still being supportive? But it takes continual work, no matter how long you're an interviewer, that we need to be paying attention, we need to be evaluating, and we need to be reevaluating what we're doing. And certainly that's what I hear you saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. If you were talking to a new interviewer, someone who has just been through training, and certainly I know quite a bit of the work that you have done is, and I think most of us in the field recognize that when we send someone through a protocol training, that's not the best. And actually, that's not the best way to get someone prepared to be an interviewer. There's so much more work that has to be done. But if someone has been through a training, and I know there's probably many things that you would want to say, but what is something you could say to help them with this job of talking with children?
That's a tough question to answer. I think that the first thing, of course, is thank you. Thank you for making this commitment. It's important to understand that it is a long-term commitment. It's in some ways, it's quite different than learning to drive a car.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you first get your license, you're very good about doing everything exactly right.
Yes.
And over time, you're not quite as good. I'm old enough. At first, we had to use hand signals, and after a while, your hand signals became a little bit floppier and so on. So, but my point is that you can kind of let off a bit. Mm-hmm. And this is such a different skill because you get your license, you become a forensic interviewer so much earlier in the process. Mm-hmm. And it's good to see this as the beginning of a process. Rather than as a reflection of having attained that mm-hmm. success. And to recognize just how much we can learn from our peers, how important it is to constantly reevaluate what we've done. I mean, one of my biggest complaints has always been that agencies communicate the wrong message mm-hmm. by not allowing enough time for their interviewers to watch each other and to give clear, supportive, but honest feedback. Mm-hmm. And we know from the research that even when it's not your interview being discussed, hearing others openly say, yeah, I'm not sure that was the best question, or I used the wrong words there, is a good way of creating this willingness to acknowledge what might be done differently. And I think that's the critical thing for new interviewers to learn, that they're starting on this process, that it's highly rewarding, that it's very stressful, and that for good interviewers are their own worst critics.
True, that is so true.
Toughest critics, and if you'll know you're a good interviewer when you come out of each one and you know what you want to do differently the next time.
That is true. Yes, there are times you walk out of an interview and you're like, that didn't work, and I need to not do that again.
Exactly.
But sometimes you come out and you think, I created an opportunity for a child to share their experiences.
Exactly.
So it keeps us going.
And it's important to reflect on those and think, yeah, I think I did a pretty good job today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Lamb, I cannot tell you how thankful we are that you are here today. Thank you for your contributions to the field. And please go to calio.org. All of Dr. Lamb's articles are available, and encourage you to read them all. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much.
If you'd like more information, please check out calio.org. Also look at the NCAC Virtual Training Center for different webinars and seminars that have been recorded with experts in the field. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please email me at the link below. Thanks and have a great day.